Story 1. Early 90s in middle school, I was a sixth grader and in our band class, with one of my friends being this nicer guy named John. He was in seventh grade in this class. Pretty much any grade could join with me. However, there was another guy named Ben who was in this class that was also a seventh grader, and he was mean. One day there was a mandatory sixth grade assembly, and the band director had to walk us across campus to the assembly. John confided to me that when you leave, I know Ben is going to hurt me. The pain in John's face was indescribable. I didn't know what to do, but my mom was the art teacher at the school, and luckily the art room was next to the band room, and when our teacher let us out, I made sure I was last in the line. My mom was a cool teacher, but she smartened me up to being a teacher's kid and told me never to tell or report what other kids do as some tattletale. But this I felt was going to be extreme, and luckily she was hanging up a new artwork display in the hall, and I told her what John said to me. She said she understood and promised she'd check in on that class. The whole half-hour assembly, I'm a nervous wreck and wondering if John is okay. Well, luckily he was. According to my mom, she walked in just to check in on the class and found that Ben had John pressed up against the wall. Apparently, Ben had a protractor compass needle from math class out in his hand, and he had the needle in the ear canal of John. Luckily, Mom caught him before any physical damage occurred. John was incredibly rattled, and Ben caught a semester-long suspension from school. Years later, John worked in the music industry and even won a couple Grammy Awards for his efforts. Ben, however, didn't turn out well at all. More suspensions and expulsions. He eventually became a drug dealer and one night tried robbing a fellow drug dealer while driving around. The drug dealer shot him in the chest and then set the car on fire, where he subsequently burned. He was only 18. Story 2. I had a student in second grade, 7 years old, who was just all kinds of messed up. I think he had experienced a lot of trauma already. His mom had no boundaries and a revolving door of mean boyfriends, etc. He could be really sweet, but he could also get overwhelmed easily and take it out aggressively on others. My campus had to buy an extra walkie-talkie for me specifically so I could call administration if he was getting agitated and I needed help quickly. The worst thing he ever did in my class was when we came in from recess one day. He was overstimulated after playing outside, and all my students were getting their materials for our next lesson. He had a package of brand new pre-sharpened pencils. He used one of the pencils to poke another student. Before I could react and remove him from the other boy, he grabbed a handful of his pencils, turned around, and absolutely stabbed my other student with all of them. I immediately cleared the room, had all my kids go to the classroom next door as the offending child eloped, ran from the room. I followed him down the hall right into the assistant principal. He spent the rest of the day in the office, and I spent about an hour crying in the teacher's lounge before getting my kids and resuming class. I already hated working at that school. They were so unsupportive, and even after this event, it took a while to get the kid removed from my class and in the behavior unit. I'm so glad to have only worked there 1 year. Story 3. Not a teacher, but I worked at a daycare for quite a while. We had a kid who had a literal breakdown. He was 8 at the time, and I know he was going through a lot at home. Parents had separated, but they were trying to get back together, and apparently they fought constantly and loudly. He had some behavioral problems, but he seemed like he was genuinely a pretty sweet kid. One day he cut in line, and I asked him to go back to the end of the line. He lost it. He started screaming and running up and down the hall, banging on the wall. I was finally able to get him back to the classroom, and he threw a golf club at my head. Thankfully, I ducked, and we were able to get him locked in an office. He dumped over trash cans, threw everything all over the place, and threatened to spray cleaner in people's eyes or poke them with pencils if they came near him. We were able to keep him locked in there until his mom came, and he was expelled from the program. But as I looked at him through the window, it really looked like he wanted to hurt me. In a way, I felt bad for him. I think I heard that he was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. It was terrifying, though. I wish I could have done more for him. I wish I had seen the signs. Maybe I could have helped. I have dreams about him sometimes. He runs up to me and hugs me like he used to. Then suddenly he's in a straitjacket and repeating over and over, "Why didn't you help me?" Story 4. I had a student on her first day in my class, School for Violent and At-Risk Youth, court mandated but no orange jumpsuits. They were bussed in from all over the city. She was 14 years old and in 6th grade for the third time. Explained to me that she hated school, was only there because it's mandated, and she didn't want to go to juvie, but as soon as she aged out, she was done. I told her that was fine, asked her to keep her seat and try not to distract anyone else. She was cool with that, until the principal walked past the windows of my room. That girl stood up calmly and without a word picked up her desk and threw it through the window. It took 6 cops to get her subdued and into their squad car. The graceful 2-footed kick she delivered to the chest of the first guy gently backed her into the car was nearly as comical as her leap and run from the car. She was side-tackled by one of our teachers, and we never saw her again. I worked there for 4 years, teaching English and reading to 6th and 7th graders. It was intense. Story 5. Didn't happen to me, but to a colleague. We were teaching undergrad at the time while working on our postgrad degree in the same university, so I knew him as my classmate from the same program, though we taught different types of classes. One day during the last week of the semester, he told me one of his students had gone to his office and asked him to revise his final grade since the kid had failed the course due to many missed assignments and routinely skipping class. And when he naturally refused to pass him, the kid very calmly told him that if he didn't pass him, he'd run the risk of having something pretty unfortunate happen to him because the kid's family was connected. Thing is, the kid's last name was the same as a very well-known drug lord mobster, and the kid obviously had plenty of money to burn, and that was partly why he failed the class, since he was always partying and so on. Well, my friend told me he was struggling with deciding what to do because, on the one hand, he didn't want to pass him and suspected he might be messing with him, but on the other hand, it was entirely feasible that it was true, and he didn't want to get sent to the hospital or worse because he failed a mobster's son. Sometime later, he told me he'd opted to give the kid the lowest passing grade possible because he didn't want to risk it, and he felt he couldn't realistically do anything about it. Story 6. I taught in a Title I elementary school for several years in my 20s. I knew kids could be cruel, but the only genuinely scary thing I witnessed was a large 5th grade boy, 5'8" and 120 pounds, intentionally try for several seconds to push a colleague off the building's 2nd floor balcony. The teacher was traumatized, and several colleagues and I held her while she was sobbing during her break before having to report back to class. The student had a 1-day suspension and then was back in class like nothing ever happened. I quit the next year and never looked back. There is a big difference between loving to teach and loving being a teacher. And while I'll always love teaching, that incident and the inadequate response to it destroyed my love of being a teacher for good. Story 7. Former kindergarten teacher here. I had a troubled kid born to a drug-addicted mother and being adopted and raised by family members. He had oppositional defiant disorder, among some other things. He would go from the sweetest kid you'd ever seen to an absolute nightmare with no warning or triggers. What was worse was that no one in the faculty or administration believed how bad it was until they finally removed him from class and put him somewhere else after 4 or 5 months. This child would ransack the classroom, scream at the top of his lungs, throw book bags, books, lunch boxes, clothing, even other people's. He would throw the little chairs, flip the desk, and throw them, hit and kick me, then act like everything was fine a few minutes later. I had to push my reset button with that child like 10 times a day and somehow managed to still do my job with 25 other 5-year-olds in my class, catering to the needs of each one with zero help. I was the least experienced teacher at the time, but they put him in my class because nobody else wanted him, and they played the "you're a man, so you should be able to handle" card, while at the same time playing the "you're a man, so not as good as us, or nurturing, and have no good ideas" with everything else. So hypocritical. Anyway, the final straw was when he took a pencil from a little girl, and when told to give it back, he stabbed her with it. I was out sick with strep throat that day, but when I came back, I found he was no longer in my class, and they had swapped him with the most veteran teacher who traded her lowest performing student that didn't speak English, because of course she did. What they didn't know was that I could speak a little Spanish and found out right away that the kid was so smart he just couldn't speak any English. So I worked with the ESL teacher closely, and that kid was an absolute brilliant kid. A little bit of an artist too. But yeah, after the kid with ODD stabbed that little girl with a pencil, her parents and the ones that had been privy to everything all along demanded he be removed from my class, something I had been trying to do for months but had no support. That's just one thing of a mile-long list of messed up crap I've seen students, parents, teachers, teacher assistants, administrators, and office staff do, but it stuck with me even 13 years later after I quit. I also knew a teacher that lived in her car, basically had dementia, and would chug vodka before and after work. Another older lady teacher was basically emotionally abusive to her children, and I was the fun teacher, so I started doing random appearances in her classroom every day to ask her questions and drop something off, because she would stop yelling at those poor kids when I came in. I'd also bring her class candy and treats and just say I had extra left over from my class, when the reality was I did it because she wouldn't, and it gave me another way to stop her from being cruel. Story 8. A fight broke out in my classroom. Unfortunately, this kind of thing happens at my school on occasion. Kids in my area don't always have the best coping skills. A lot of times you can see a fight coming and can head it off at the pass, or remove a kid if they seem to be building up to it. For some, it's enough to have them go to the bathroom or take a quick walk to blow off some steam. In this case, it was scary because of how close I was to getting hurt and how out of nowhere it was. I was working with a small group while the rest of the class did independent work, talking them through questions and just generally giving extra support. One kid was super quiet, but trying really hard. The class clown type sitting on the opposite side of me. There were 4 desks opposite each other, with me at a 5th desk on one side, mutters to the quiet kid, "Why you reading so slow?" Apparently, the quiet kid was very embarrassed about his learning difficulties. What I didn't expect was for him to lunge across the table and start beating the other child. This was literally in front of me. I tried to separate them, but got hit in the arm, went to the door, and got security in there. Once security escorted the quiet kid out, the class clown was having some sort of emotional head injury related episode. He was having a full on meltdown, flipping desks over, tearing things off the walls. Well, I found out later he had a concussion. I didn't see either of those students again the rest of the year. I had to clean blood off the walls. Weirdest thing was the weird smirk or grin one of the administrators gave me after coming by to check what was going on. It felt kind of like it was like a teacher hazing thing, like, "Well, you've been through a bad fight now. You're a real teacher." Maybe because I'm a guy, but no one was asking if I was okay, if I needed a talk. I was shaking. Literally had to go to my next class in a separate room and continue my lesson like nothing happened. I'm still a teacher 4 years later, but that was my first taste of disillusionment with the education system, and it's definitely not the last. That's the end of the stories, and thank you for listening, and have a good night or day. Let me know in the comments below if anything scary has happened in your school. Thanks again for listening. Have a good day. Bye.